Blog Talk Radio.
The purple angel, oh purple angel, you're next to me. Purple angel, oh purple angel, you're next to me. You're next to me. You're next to me.
Well, hi, everyone. This is Lori LeBay, the host and founder of Alzheimer Speaks, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. We show up on your doorstep and in your computer every Tuesday morning, and you can go ahead and listen to us archived shows anytime. So know that. Feel free to go ahead and subscribe if you just need a little reminder. For those of you that are new, I just thought I'd give you a little information about what Alzheimer Speaks is and why we were started. Bottom line, my mom lived with dementia for 30 years, and I just found it so frustrating not to be connected and really felt isolated and alone, and that I didn't have the resources. And so through her disease, I created Alzheimer Speaks, which started as a blog and a website. Now it's a radio. We do webinars where our experts on dementia chats actually have dementia, and we can talk with them regarding that. Regarding any issues and things that we have. But Alzheimer Speaks is really about raising everyone's voice, giving equal platform. There are such fantastic resources out there that so many of us don't know about around the world. And so here on Alzheimer Speaks, we try to raise everyone's voice, from those living with the disease who are diagnosed to those caring for them, to business professionals who are providing services and products and tools. We have advocates on and activists on. We've had researchers. So if you're interested in being on the show, if you're doing something that you think others need to know about regarding dementia and caregiving, please reach out to me, because I would love to talk to you. We believe here that by joining forces and sharing knowledge and just having these everyday conversations like we're going to have today on the show, that we're going to be able to remove the stigmas attached to memory loss and dementia and give those who are battling this disease hope, and renew them with purpose and get them comfortable in society. I believe that that's a way that we can become, you'll hear the term dementia friendly, and I think this is one step in a really big direction in order to do that. At our core, collaboratively, I believe we can win this battle, and I know that we're making great strides because we were recognized as a #1 influencer online by ShareCare and Dr. Oz, and we did not do that alone. That was because of our fan base, all of you listening, taking the time to like us, to share this information, if it's with your Twitter tribe or your Facebook friends or your LinkedIn colleagues or your Google circle. It doesn't make any difference. The more information we can push out to the public and to our sphere of influences, the more likely people who are dealing with this disease will tap into it, because it's going to look more common in every day, and people aren't going to feel so isolated. So really appreciate you all doing, continuing to do that with all the episodes, pushing them out in every which direction. We also invite you to join the conversation with us, and so you can do that in a couple of different fashions. You can listen via the chat box or communicate with us via the chat box, or you can call in live to the studio, and that number is 714-364-4757. Again, that's 714-364-4757. And all you have to do is push 1 if you have a comment or a question. And I promise that I will pull you in as soon as there is a gap. Before I introduce our guest today, who I'm so excited to have with us because this is just a huge topic. We're going to be talking about their book, The Family Guide to Aging Parents, and we're going to be focusing on competency issues with finance and other things. And these questions come up so often. But before I get to our guests, I do want to give a shout out to some other resources that I think are really important. Again, we have Alzheimer's Disease International, which is the association of all the Alzheimer's associations around the world. So no matter where you are sitting right now, you can tap into them. You can find one of the associations that is closest to you. Along with that, at the international level, you'll get global insights and research as well. If you are local, like I am here in Minnesota, HealthStar Home Health is absolutely fabulous. They do a program called the Alzheimer's Whisperer, and they not only know how to treat and work with those with dementia, but they also help families learn how to deal with the disease. So they're just a really cool organization. Others might be looking for a holistic angle. And for that, I would recommend going to the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation. With them, you will find things on diet and exercise and meditation. They also do some free educational programs as well. Many people are dealing with specific types of dementia other than just Alzheimer's, and so then I recommend you go to the Lewy Body Dementia Association or the Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration. Those are the two national organizations for those specific types, which can be really helpful. Other people are struggling with speech, and you can go to the National Aphasia Association, and that is spelled APHASIA, the National Aphasia Association. There's also a new organization out there now called the Dementia Action Alliance, or DAA, and you can actually go to my website, and on the home page we are asking people to participate in a survey. If you are in the U.S., if there are two different surveys. One is if you are diagnosed with dementia, and the other is for those that care with them, and we would love your input. It's not going to take you very long to do the survey, but it will have a huge impact. We want to know what the needs are out there, and this is a great collaboration of people, and I'm very excited to be a member of it, and I would encourage you to take that survey. I took one as a caregiver myself. Many people also are asking about clinical trials, and I would recommend that you go to the Alzheimer's team. You can get to them through Facebook. You can also find them on my website as well. But they're really helping advance the Alzheimer's research, and you can enroll your loved one or yourself if you've got dementia in a clinical trial today, and there is no cost to participate. There'll be a brief survey there too that you can take, which will just let you know if you fall into the clinical trial study needs, of what they're looking for. Last, I'm just going to give a shout out to Alzheimer's Music Connect, who I love with all my heart. I think music is so powerful with people dealing with dementia, along with Puzzle With Me and the Jiminy Wicket program, which is a croquet company. And Jiminy Wicket is it's very fun because it can be utilized for both kids in school, learning how to deal with and understand a little bit more about dementia. And they typically will hook students up with a one-on-one with somebody with dementia, and very fabulous and fun process for all with that. There's also another company called Pieces of the Past, which is a really cool puzzle company in Wisconsin that I think you'd be interested in as well. So check out pieces of the past. And with that, let me go ahead and introduce our guest today. Like I said, I'm so excited that we have the author, Carolyn Rosenblatt, of the book, which is entitled The Family Guide to Aging Parents. She has over 45 years of experience in combined professions of nursing and legal practice, which is pretty cool. She has direct experience in caring for elders in nursing homes, hospitals, and in their own home. And together with her husband, who is also here with us, who's a geriatric psychologist, Dr. Mikol Davis, they both founded agingparents.com, which is a resource for families. And they also have a website called aginginvestor.com, which offers education and training about aging clients for financial and other professionals. Carolyn has a special interest in preventing financial abuse, which is just so critical out there, and she does consulting on aging, and she's been quoted in a variety of major publications and has appeared on radio discussing questions about aging parents and clients. So welcome, Carolyn. How are you today?
Oh, thank you so much, Lori. I'm doing great.
Well, good. Let me do a brief introduction with your husband, and then we'll get rolling with some questions here. Dr. Davis, like I said, is a clinical psychologist, and he has over 40 years of experience in mental health. He's helped hundreds of individuals, families, and couples deal with relationship issues, and he has a particular interest in elders and the issues of aging as it affects families. He evaluates elders for capacity for decision-making and is skilled in assessing and diagnosing financial capacity in those with cognitive impairment, which is a concern for people all the time. So I'm really interested in talking about that today. Dr. Davis is also an experienced mediator for family conflicts, which, again, many families need to pull that in. They just cannot get through the disputes. And he has a significant teaching experience in communication. He has expertise in intergenerational issues involving businesses, transfer of wealth, and difficulties with communication among family. So welcome today. How are you doing, Dr. Davis?
Just fine. Thank you very, very much. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you both here. Your book is absolutely fabulous, Caroline, and it's something that is so needed for families. Before we get started, I'm just going to pose a question to each of you, just to see if you have been personally touched in your circle of family or friends by dementia. And Caroline, I'll throw that to you first. It's just always interesting for our listeners to know that.
Yes, my grandmother had dementia. She lived to be 93, and nobody called it dementia back then, but certainly she did not remember who she was and didn't exactly recognize family by name. She was very peaceful with her dementia, and she had caregiving all the time, but it really was sad to me to see how she deteriorated from what she had been, an active, very engaged person in her community and with her very large family, and to see her really just kind of being so frail and dependent. It was a peaceful kind of road for her, as it isn't for everybody, because she really had so much attention. But I really saw how sad it was and how isolated she became. Without family, she would have been really in great distress.
Oh, wow. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. How about you, Mikol? Have you been touched by dementia, family or friends?
I haven't been with family. I have been touched by some friends that have dealt with the long battle of dealing with caring for an aging loved one with dementia, but more specifically, professionally, I've just seen hundreds of individuals who have dementia. I've diagnosed them with having dementia, and more importantly, worked with lots and lots and lots of families and helped them through the journey of trying to figure out the roles and responsibilities and how to maneuver and maintain their own mental wellness and sanity through the process.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you. Carolyn, I'm going to throw this question to you first. As you work with families, what do you see as the most difficult steps they need to take when a loved one is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia?
I think because our society has such fear and there's such stigma attached to even the word dementia or Alzheimer's disease, that people are in denial, and they can't really wrap their minds around what they need to do to prepare for the inevitable decline that their loved one is going to experience. The journey is long, and it was certainly very long for you. I think for a lot of people, because it's gradual, the changes and the deterioration of one's ability to think and act appropriately and make the right decisions is very gradual. People don't do anything. I think the most difficult thing is to be proactive, to acknowledge that the person is going to lose their capacity for things like making financial decisions and other things, and to prepare legally for that. Because when people wait, as most everyone seems to do, because it's so painful to embrace the concept that their loved one has this terrible problem and it's going to get worse, they just kind of say, well, we'll wait until it does get worse and then we'll act. And they end up waiting until it's too late for the person who's diagnosed to do anything legally, and then they end up having to spend money on lawyers and go to court and get a guardianship and that sort of thing. That's preventable. But I think the hardest part is really acceptance.
Yep.
Well, you also see people that it's kind of a polar response. They either are willing to step up and understand that they will embrace the idea of being a caregiver and do everything they can to be present and to help. And then you see other family members that are equally in the other response, where they just withdraw and retreat and want to hide out in denial and want to believe that maybe there's a drug that's going to come on the market that's going to take care of it. So I think you see a lot of kind of polar responses in how people choose to respond. And you're right, Carolyn. The most practical, being a lawyer you are, the most practical is, when you see a problem, is to move forward and to do everything you can to ensure that your loved one's wishes are going to be honored in every possible way. I think that we as human beings, unfortunately, tend to not be that practical, and what we tend to do instead is have our actions be very much ruled by our fears.
Very true. One of the questions I get constantly, and I'm sure you guys too, is families will be split on this. So, one person will pick up the ball and say, okay, I'll be the care partner here, and then the rest of the family kind of waltzes away and just lets them at it. And there's a lot of frustration and things, and I hear people say all the time, how do I get my siblings to understand? How do I get them to help? How do I get them to change? How do I fix them? And do you guys hear that a lot? And Carolyn, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes, we certainly hear that. That's probably the most common complaint. That and the financial question are the most common things we hear about. It's a refrain, and it goes back to the first question, I think, because the ones who refuse to help or don't do anything, or they hide out and retreat or make excuses for not participating in this very difficult job of being a care partner for someone with Alzheimer's disease or other dementia, that's really hard on the one who is willing to take responsibility. They can't face it or don't choose to face it, and so they just pretend that it's okay to leave it be, and that makes the burden of caregiving fall on the one or two responsible people in the family, usually the daughter or daughter-in-law I'm seeing. And it's not always that way, but it's most often that way, that it is one of the women in the family who steps up and says, okay, we've got to deal with this. We can't leave mom alone anymore, or we can't leave dad by himself, or he shouldn't be driving, or whatever it is. And the resentment that builds up with the increasingly heavy burden of caregiving by the person who is the primary caregiver is very toxic. That resentment is very toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the frustration comes in believing or thinking that the people who aren't being responsible are going to change. And our advice usually goes something like this. Look, if your sibling or siblings are not helping you now, they're not going to get any better because they should. They're not going to get any more responsible because you see it's so obvious that your mom or your dad or whoever needs help. And it's just so apparent that they should step up, but they refuse to. It's a pattern, and the primary caregiver is not going to change that pattern. And what we counsel people to do is really change your expectations. Don't expect that they're going to help if they never have or they're not doing it now. Because
well, you are the oldest. You always took charge of it. Why do I have to do anything?
That's what they say. Or you live closest, or you've got more time, or whatever it is. There's always an excuse. The excuses are ridiculous. They're not fair, but that's how it is. And I think that when the primary caregiver places too much hope or expectation on fellow siblings or other family members who should step up and don't, that primary caregiver is going to feel a lot more anger and sadness and rage and depression than need be. It's better to look elsewhere for help. That's what I tell them.
I agree. The one thing that I learned in my journey, and it was actually after my dad died of brain cancer, that I'll add to this, and because I think it's something that most of us don't even consider, because I think all the points you two brought up, excuse me, are very valid. But one thing that I didn't consider in that whole relationship issue of why my siblings, why my younger brother didn't really step in, was that they would never meet my expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And, they looked at me as a control freak. I looked at me as organized,
Sure.
and kind of, the gal who just kind of jumped in there and took care of things. And so part of what we had of a discussion, and which really saddened me after my dad died, was I had all these stories and my brothers didn't. And they said, well, how did you get all these stories? And I just looked at them and I just said, I was there. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, we knew we wouldn't do it right.
Yeah, right.
There was a lot of truth to that. In terms of, well, they're supposed to get their pill at this time or dinner at this. I mean, I was much more of a sergeant than I ever realized that I was, because, there was so much to manage, and that schedule was really important. So it really made me step back and realize what everybody brings to the plate, and that, my parents enjoyed a whole different relationship with them. And I told my brothers, I'll take some responsibility, but I won't take it all. You also didn't want to feel the pain and the emotions of what was going on. And it was just easier to push it away. And and I think
that's it right there. Yeah, that's it. That's the reason
Carol, we've also seen this over and over again. A lot of what also surfaces in time of need is all of the old family dynamics of the relationships between the brothers and the sisters. And if you were the oldest one and you were used to the one of bossing your younger siblings around, it would be very common that then the oldest one would probably step up, take responsibility, and the younger ones would expect that they would get their marching orders. And depending on their relationship with you as adolescents, a lot of times the way they would respond is kind of giving you the middle finger and going in the other direction. And so we see a lot of acting out as adults when it comes time to take on that role of caregiver, that they're playing out a lot of the family dynamics that are still very much alive in their heads of what happened back when we were kids. And it's amazing that those scripts that a lot of us hold on to get in the way at times of great need. And unfortunately, what we find ourselves doing is allowing ourselves to focus on our past and our own issues with our siblings instead of really putting those needs aside and seeing that, wait a second, what's really important here? It's mom's. This is time for me to be available to take care of mom or dad. And we don't see often people being that selfless like you were, Lori, and understanding the calling and just stepping forward and realizing that it's just part of what we do in life. You know, the other thing that we didn't touch upon, which I think is very fascinating to Carolyn and I, as we have talked to so many hundreds and thousands of people, is how this issue of stepping up and dealing with being the caregivers is so different in other cultures. And people of different cultures look at how Americans struggle with doing this and don't understand why it's a struggle, because it's culturally, obviously, in so many other cultures, it is very much part of the DNA that if mom and or dad obviously need us, well, first off, they're often just downstairs or in the community, and as a culture, that's what we are taught to do. That's the appropriate thing to do, and it would cause great shame and embarrassment if we did anything different than that. And so I think we in America have a lot to learn from other cultures about the importance of how we care for the elderly, and particularly when they have things, they have diagnoses like dementia, and really learn to be a lot more selfless and step up instead of being so focused on ourselves and our own individual needs.
I agree. Why don't we go to the next question here? And again, I'm going to start with Carolyn, and then we'll just kind of have our conversation so we're not talking over one another. But what should a family member do when a person with dementia resists giving up control of financing? You know, when they're starting to see issues of, you know, I mean, I've had one friend where dad was very involved in the stock market, you know, and he was charging things, and you know, they took the keys away from the car, and he would call a cab, and I mean, he just kept maneuvering around, and they really struggled. You know, I've got another girlfriend who's dealing with her mom. I mean, it's a very common issue because they don't always see the need for the change in control. So how do families deal with that?
Well, they don't deal with it very well, or we wouldn't have a $36 billion a year problem with elder abuse in this country. Those are the latest statistics. You know, there's a recent study that the government tells us that $2.9 billion are stolen from elders every year. And a more recent study that went into a different kind of detail put the figure at $36.45 billion a year stolen. Not all of those thefts and abuse come because people have dementia, but there is a high correlation between people who have dementia and elder abuse financially, because the people who have this brain disease are vulnerable. They are easily manipulated. They are not able to exercise the kind of judgment that you would or I would. They do not see a scam coming. They don't have the wisdom available to them because of the brain disease to discern the difference between somebody who wants to help them and somebody who wants to rip them off. So families need to make a decision, and that decision is, am I going to allow this demented parent to continue to make financial decisions, putting his or her financial safety at risk, or am I going to step in, assert myself, stop it by taking the power away? That's really what it boils down to. And it doesn't have to be so black and white, and it certainly doesn't have to happen in one moment. But anyone who has a parent with dementia, diagnosed in the earliest stages, when that parent is still competent to sign a durable power of attorney if they don't already have one, needs to get that done. And with the exercise of that legal document, the appointed person, whom we call the agent, can step in when it gets to be apparent that mom or dad or grandma or whoever can no longer make judgments about money and take that power away. Now, it doesn't mean you leave them bereft of all participation. You include them in the discussion. You let them know, okay, this is the check to pay your electricity bill, and I'm going to have you sign this for now, but there comes a time where you may not be able to recognize what the bill is. At that point, I'm going to sign the checks for you. My name is on your checking account because we've planned ahead for this. And if you think you want to give money to the Prince of Arabia because they contacted you on the Internet, I'm not going to let you do that because you're going to end up broke. And the elder will say, well, you don't understand, or how dare you, because I'm in charge here and I've always been the dad of the head of the household. You have to just let them say that and acknowledge that it's very difficult to give up control, but we all have to recognize that disease is disease and it's very dangerous.
But the dynamics of how you go about having that conversation is what we see people struggling with day in and day out. They want to know, well, what's the script? How do I approach this? Because I know I'm going to get grave resistance in even bringing up the subject. What do I do with my family? Because not everyone in my family supports taking this kind of action. So where do we start? And I think the answer is really where we start is that if you can't have a united front, I think it's similar to dealing with teenagers. I mean, if you can't have a united front in being strong and putting forward what needs to happen in order to protect that person, then you're going to continue to be undermined by other family members. And that's a first step that's got to be focused on. Less about the elder and more about your family. You know, who is going to support what needs to be done? And if you don't support it, are you willing to not sabotage the efforts of other family members who are doing what they believe is the right thing to do? So you've got to clear the path of at least having that going forward, or you're going to continually undermine any of your well-thought-out efforts to try to protect your aging loved one. Once you get that, once at least you've got everyone and or most people that are committed to the mission of doing what's necessary, we've found to be effective, similar to doing interventions in the mental health field, doing an intervention with mom and or dad, with bringing everyone from the family together and having a very clear statement that's being made to mom or dad about this is the time that we need to do what's necessary to keep you safe. And it's not often a rational discussion because the aging loved one is going to fight in every possible way to assert their control and their independence, and it's not going to be an easy process, and it's not going to be a process that if you offer enough logical explanation and reason of why it's in their best interest, that ain't going to sell it either. It really is more about you as the adult children and the burden that you would experience if you just stood by and allowed your aging loved one to be taken advantage of. It's the burden that you would feel personally that it would place on you if you chose to just stand back and not take action. That's one of the most powerful pitches that we've seen that's had a very positive effect on the transition. And I think it's got to be a transition. There's got to be clear steps. And I think as concrete as this can be, that's the strategies that we've seen that have been most effective. And this is the one area that repeatedly we see people screwing up and fouling up and having the most difficulty with.
Now, I have a question for you because this has come up several times. With a durable power of attorney, and that's what I used with my folks, and it worked brilliantly, but they also were very comfortable with me having that power. And sometimes with a person with dementia, they're okay with it, and then all of a sudden they're not okay with it. And somebody will say, well, just because there's a power of attorney doesn't mean that they're giving up rights so that they can still make decisions. So, for example, I had again, a girlfriend with a mom who, she lives in Minnesota. Mom's down in, where is she? In Pennsylvania. And lives in a senior building, a bank in the facility. They had requirements and discussions about limiting her account and what she could draw on, and they all kind of agreed on it. But then Mom would go in and take out more money. And Mom was a huge target of scammers. I mean, just massively, hugely targeted. And so she went in and had withdrawn some significant cash, and they went and did it on more than one occasion. And they said, well, she's still competent. Just because you're a power of attorney, you would have to have remove her name from the account altogether. And she didn't want to do that because she wanted her mom to still be able to have access, and not limit her. And so, with the power of attorney, everyone always thinks that, that will cover everything, but it doesn't always work if the person with dementia says, well, I don't want you to have that anymore, or I still want to make a decision independently, they can still override that power of attorney. Is that correct? Because I've heard that from many, many angles.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult because when the person is in what we call the gray zone, where they're partly competent and partly incompetent, they can fool anyone into thinking that they're fine. I will tell you this. There has been significant research on Alzheimer's disease and financial capacity by the foremost researcher in our country, Dr. Daniel Marson, at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He has studied this exact issue for decades. The conclusion of the research, just to put it very briefly, is that in the very earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease, the person is already moderately impaired for making financial decisions. So this notion that you want mom to still have access is extremely dangerous. The best solution, if you're worried about the power of attorney, is to take the money out of the account, leave just enough so that mom can, quote, end quote, have access, but do not leave her with a wad of cash that she can be ripped off for. Either that, you can honor her independence right into bankruptcy. And, I feel strongly about this because I see so much elder abuse and it makes me really angry. And it also is very frustrating for me as a lawyer because there are legal means to stop it. People just don't think it through. If you have power of attorney or you're a joint account holder, that means you can take money out of the account without the other person having to approve it. So take it out. Put it in a separate account in your name only. You're the power of attorney. Use your authority. Step up. Be responsible. Take that authority and use it the way it is designed for you to use it so that you can protect your loved one. Otherwise, if you are sitting passively there waiting for something to happen when you will know exactly at the moment when your elder should no longer have total authority over the checking account alone, you're waiting for elder abuse. That's what you're waiting for.
Yeah.
But if I step up and take action, they're going to be upset with me.
Yeah, that's the excuse. And I say, gee, that's too bad.
You know what? We have a wonderful man on the line by the name of Mikol Davis who has a question, and he actually is living with dementia. And so I'm going to pull Mikol in. Mikol, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Did you have a question or a comment?
Well, I got some comments here. I mean, this whole conversation really disturbs me in many ways. As she said, I'm living with Alzheimer's, and I've also recently ran into a situation where my own mother now has Alzheimer's, and I've had to interact with her own financials because she was no longer paying her bills. But it's easier said than done to make the statements that some of the people are making here today because I had a very complicated stock portfolio, and I know I can no longer make some of those decisions because I don't understand things. But I have to tell you, I still make better decisions than the person I'm turning it over to, which happens to be my wife. They don't understand it. They don't understand it. And they're ready to run into the ground because they themselves have no clue on what to do with it. So I think it's very unfair to say that you expect your loved ones to take over something that they don't even know how to manage. And they can run into the ground. They can run it faster to the ground than I probably did because they're just interested in just making it clean and everything else. In the meantime, they're losing big dollars just because of not knowing what they're doing, just thinking that they're doing the right thing. So I think it's important that there's somebody out there that can help people like myself who become in this situation that can give guidance to the spouse and the person who has it so they can work through it. And you're right. I've become very gullible. Things can happen much easier to me. But there's got to be the right people, and I don't believe the financial institutions are out there to help us because their interest is themselves, not us. So there's got to be a better mechanism out there for people, and I don't know what that is because it doesn't exist today.
Well, you've raised some excellent points, Michael, and I will tell you one thing. If you have appointed someone to be your agent on your power of attorney and that person doesn't have a clue about what to do, you have the right to pick someone else. And that's a solution. Because as long as you still have the capacity that you seem to have right now to decide who you want to handle your affairs, pick someone else, someone who has experience. It does not have to be your wife. Or you can appoint someone to assist your wife and share that power of attorney. The one thing about a power of attorney is that it can be revoked at any time that the person still has capacity. And it sounds as if you probably do still.
Hello?
I'm here.
Okay. I think one of them I think Carolyn got dropped. So, Mikol, do you have anything you want to add? It looks like Carolyn's call got dropped somehow.
She will call back in and try to reconnect.
Okay.
But I think the point that she was hearing, because I could hear part of that, was that more of same, which is that considering what the caller is talking about, it makes great sense that we look at other resources that are available to be also on the power of attorney with him in response to being able to, okay, hold on, and so that someone else in addition that would be more competent in this financial matter would be able to be involved, that would help ensure that the quality of service that he needs to take care of this more complicated portfolio would get the attention that it needs. There are some resources available. There are in our state, in California, there are what's called professional fiduciaries, and I don't know if you have that in Wisconsin or wherever the caller is calling from, but these are positions for people that are trained in dealing with managing other people's money, and it's a fee service, so it's paid, obviously, but these are people that are trained and know well how to deal with often much more sophisticated financial matters. And the advantage of that is that they don't, unlike, as the caller was saying, unlike the people in the financial institution, they don't have any part of what's going on other than ensuring that they're representing their client and doing right by him. I think that the point that the caller also made, which is an aspect of something that Carolyn and I have been dealing with a lot on the side of our company, aginginvestor.com, is exactly what the caller is talking about, is that when in fact the other spouse steps in to take over financially, often they're not prepared and they have had no real financial background, and they're not familiar with this very sophisticated portfolios of various stocks and bonds and other kinds of alternative investments. And so their job to step in and to immediately get involved at the level of which that they need to, the learning curve is rather steep, and for a lot of people, they're overwhelmed by that process. And so we often consider and encourage people when they're considering who they would choose, and often it's almost automatic, they would think in terms of a spouse, to consider perhaps bringing in a professional person that would equally share in that role.
Okay. Now, you said a professional fiduciary. Is that what you called it?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. And I know I know in Minnesota we don't have a ton of them. There are a few, but I think too. I mean, I've seen professional fiduciaries that can do kind of day-to-day bill pay and stuff, but when it comes to really complicated portfolio, I think that's something that you have to interview specifically, because I don't know if all of them are skilled at that, and I think that was Michael's specific question.
They're not all skilled at that, absolutely, and they vary. Yep. They vary as people vary. And I think one must choose extremely carefully. I mean, it's one option. The other option is to have a friend or someone else share the power of attorney, someone who does have the necessary skill, so that you can step in and not only watch over their portfolio, but watch that financial institution. Michael raised a really good point. Most of the broker-dealers in this country do not even have a standard that requires that they do what's best for the client. They do what's best for the institution as long as it's well suitable, is what they call it. They can sell anything for any reason. And their self-interest is in direct conflict with a person who is trying to keep their portfolio from losing money during a time when they're vulnerable. And that's another form of elder abuse, by the way, by financial brokers and dealers and institutions and financial planners and unscrupulous people. And they will sell something with high commissions in order to make a lot of money for themselves. And it's, you know, on the outside looking like it's okay because, well, it's suitable. But it's not in the best interests of the impaired person at all. So I think that having someone who is power of attorney for a person with dementia, who has skill and is looking out for the individual rather than letting the institution tell everyone what to do, very important step and a very important point that I think is good that was raised today.
Well, and I like that you brought up you can have more than one person be a power of attorney. You can have dual powers of attorney, and you can assign specific things. You could have a power of attorney just for financials. You could have one just for health. You could have one just for properties. I mean, you could be very specific, is my understanding, and I'm not an attorney, but just in my dealings in the past, you could do that. And so that might be something to consider. But again, for the person with dementia, that's a really difficult call to say, hi, honey, I don't think you're competent either.
Well, that's it. Why we talk about doing these things proactively is you've got to think it through. And at the very beginning, we were talking about, making the decisions and choosing people to be on these documents while you're still competent. You've got to think about what it's going to be like when you're not competent. And if that's who you really want to be handling it, somebody who's never dealt with a portfolio before. I mean, it's really not facing reality. It's really not accepting that one day you won't be able to make those decisions. That's the toughest part of this. Accepting that reality that we are going to lose capacity, most of us, at some point, whether we have dementia or not. What if you live to be 100? Maybe you're not so sharp,
And most people make those decisions, as you well know, Carolyn, not because they are trying to ensure that the most competent person will take over and act as their agent, but most people make that decision because they're concerned about conflict and they think it's the most fair way to respond.
Right.
And so often the decision is motivated by wanting to avoid conflict versus doing the right thing for the elder to ensure that their estate is protected in all the ways that you talked about. And so we see that over and over again, that the decisions that are made are often not necessarily driven based on really looking at the scope of the responsibility and who is really most competent to be able to do that, but more often because, well, my son's always done those things, so even though my daughter is a certified financial planner, she's too busy with what she's doing. I'll let my son do it, even though we also know that the son has had a long history of drug abuse and is still living at home, and he's 42. So we see that all the time. The decisions are just not often being made based on realistically looking at the scope of the responsibility and who is truly the best person to do it. And if it's not someone within the family, how about outside of the family and doing something about that and before it's too late.
Well, and that's a good point. You mentioned the professional fiduciaries. Some of them are called money managers. Some geriatric care managers will do a portion of that as well. And then there's also the piece where someone could go for full guardianship too, and some families struggle with that in terms of pulling everything away and going through the court system where they no longer are allowed to make decisions. What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure Mikol will have some thoughts on that piece as well in terms of guardianship.
Yeah, as a lawyer, I think that's an absolute last resort.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a power of attorney, and that power of attorney is a competent person, you do not have to go to court. You go to court only when everything else fails. If the person doesn't realize, and as you know, some people who have dementia don't realize that they're impaired at all. They just don't realize it. It's anosognosia. It's a part of the disease that the part of your brain that would recognize that you have a problem is gone, and so you can't recognize that you have a problem. So they think they're fine. And they want to keep driving when they're terribly dangerous. They want to keep handling a checkbook when they're already getting ripped off. They want to keep making financial decisions when they've been a victim of elder abuse already, and they refuse to allow anyone. They get violent or vicious with people, and unfortunately that's part of the reality of the disease. Then I think you have to resort to a guardianship. But to do it when you don't have all those other factors going on is very expensive. It's very time-consuming, it's very tedious, and it's embarrassing for the person to be brought into court and have to be called incompetent in public. Courts are public, they're open, and this is a matter of public record. And I think that because it is so punitive in some ways and deprives the person of nearly all of their rights, it's not the best solution to keeping them safe financially, unless that's all you have left. I think when we work together as families, when we work together with professionals to give guidance and work out the best solutions that are the most dignified solutions to keep the elder safe, we have more flexibility. We have more opportunity to be creative than you do if you go to court and there's an order saying you don't have this right anymore. So I know that people have to understand that is out there as an option. But if they don't recognize how complicated it is to do it, that you always have to have a lawyer, you have to have evidence, you have to have a doctor who says that the person isn't competent, and the laws vary from state to state, and I'm not licensed in any other state but California, so I don't know. But I do know that there's a common ground in guardianships and what we call here in California conservatorship, the same thing. You're really taking away a lot of people's rights. And they could end up somewhere where they don't want to be, and they can end up in a very miserable situation. So I really encourage people to use other means, like a better power of attorney, a new power of attorney, or a team of people who are appointed as a committee, all with power of attorney, to help that individual be safe and yet still maintain the best parts of himself for as long as possible.
Now, this is going to sound silly, but I'm going to pose this question before I pull Mikol back in. Is there a way, and I haven't seen this with power of attorney because to my knowledge, you're either assigned a specific or everybody can do a little bit of everything on it. But is there a way to almost make it a board where it's a consensus for certain decisions? Is that something that's possible to be done?
Yes.
So
you can't use the standard form that the state puts out and makes available to you online for free. There's a statutory, meaning under the law, power of attorney form that anybody can download. You can get them online. That's fine. It's better than nothing. But if that isn't good enough, and you don't want to just have one agent, and you're worried that some person is good at handling your stock portfolio, and you want your friend, the retired stockbroker, to be in charge of that, and you want your son to be in charge of deciding, where you're going to live and how you're going to pay for that, and you want somebody else to be in charge of something else, or you want the three people that you love the most to be on a committee with one of them having the veto power, that's possible. But you would have to get a lawyer in the state where this takes place to specially draft, specially write up that power of attorney to suit your needs. And, of course, you have the right to do it. And that's why I encourage people to use anything other than guardianship. Now, you did bring up one thing a little earlier, Lori, which I wanted to clarify. A health care directive or health care power of attorney is completely separate. Those are not part of the same document under the law anywhere. Health care decisions and the right to make them and appointing somebody to be your agent to make them is not the same as your money power of attorney. They can be the same person or different people, but the right to make health care decisions is separate.
Okay. And that's, I did know that, but that is a good thing to clarify. Mikol, what are your thoughts of what you've heard so far? Because you brought up some great points.
Well, I think there's just a lot of things that have to happen, and to really start looking more for the patient from a civil rights standpoint. And I think we still take that for granted, and we're not doing enough for it. She made the comment that the courts, it's embarrassing to end up in the courts and to have that done. Well, in my case, believe it or not, when I received my Social Security benefits, my disability, I didn't even have a choice whether I was competent or not competent. The court took that away from me immediately by assigning my wife to be the recipient of taking over my financials. I mean, just having dementia on your record immediately to some people means you can't no longer do financials. And I guarantee you, I could probably do financials than the majority of people out there. I may not be able to add the math or do things without the help of a calculator, but I sure could do things a lot better than most people can, and yet they took my financials away. So I think we need to have a different change in attitude on what people with dementia can do. I think we need to be able to have more patience with those people. For example, I think a financial person can put things in simpler terms for me to understand things, to make the proper decision. But if they're going to go with their fast speed of explaining something, of course I'm not going to be able to get it. But the world's not ready to spend the time and talk to people like us.
I think you're right, Michael. There are a lot of people who are very impatient and very judgmental about anyone with an impairment. And the respect that you deserve for what part of you is still functioning well needs to be there. People need to be educated about that and not make assumptions. On the other hand, if your judgment is slipping in some areas, you yourself may not recognize when it's time for someone else to help you. And the balance between those two things is what we aim for.
Very good. Very good. Well, this has been just such an interesting conversation, and I can't believe our hour is just about up. And I want to just see, can you guys stay a little longer with us and continue to talk?
Mikol's already, he's got to make it to his appointment this morning, so he's got to go.
Okay.
So I can't stay past 9 either, but
okay.
I do think this has been a good opportunity, Lori.
Oh, well, wonderful. Well, we always would love to have you back on the show another time. Great
Thank
conversation.
You.
And you can reach Carolyn or Mikol at agingparents.com. Again, that's agingparents.com or aginginvestor.com. And there you can also, email Carolyn at Rosenblatt, and that's ROSENBLATT @gmail.com, or Dr. Davis at Dr. and then Mikol is MIKOL @gmail.com as well. And please check out this book. You can go on to Amazon. You can get it on their website. And maybe it's even in your libraries, too. If not, it should be, called The Family Guide to Aging Parents, Answers to Your Legal, Financial, and Healthcare Questions. I think it's absolutely a fantastic resource, and it's been a wonderful conversation. And we've touched on a lot of things that families really do struggle with when dementia hits. So thank you both for being part of the show. And Mikol, thank you so much for calling in. Really appreciate it very much. Any last comments, either Mikol or Caroline, that you have?
Well, I just want to encourage families to work together, to come together as best they can, and when they can't, to reach outside themselves for professional assistance to help them get through the struggles. Because sometimes a neutral outside person looking from their vantage point can help families figure out what to do and avoid this painful conflicts that we see. That's part of our work, and there are helpers all over this country. The Area Agency on Aging in anyone's county is a good place to start looking for referrals if you don't know where to go. or the Alzheimer's Association has so many good social workers who are helping people get connected to their community resources. But you're not alone. That's the message I hope is conveyed. You're not alone. It may feel like a lonely struggle, but when you've got people like Lori pulling in resources and community organizations from everywhere and doing such a beautiful job of helping you find your way, I just want you to acknowledge that she's there and there are other people like her out there in the community ready, willing, and able to help you. And Lori, thank you.
Yeah, well, very much. Thank you, Lori. I also would say here's an opportunity and a call to action to all you baby boomers who are turning 65 years old or are older. If you're 65 or older, it's time for you to sit down with your kids and explain to them what your wishes are and make sure you've got your documents in order. You take the charge, you take the involvement, and you step up and show and model them that you're willing to have this conversation about what happens upon your losing capacity so that you, in fact, are doing the right thing and you're going to save yourself and your family a lot by doing that. And, Lori, yes, thank you very, very much for all the good work that you're doing. And Carolyn and I would love to come back on your phone, on your call, on radio, and do another show. We've got so many different topics we can talk about.
Yeah, this has been really, really interesting today, and it takes us all. None of us have all the answers, and questions like in comments of Mikol's, it just makes us think in different directions and address different things. So I just think it's critical to have these conversations and to get us thinking. And when it comes to powers of attorney and what do you want out of life, and as you leave this life, I think those are conversations we need to have even before we hit our 60s. I think they're conversations we need to have at 17 before we turn into legal adults. Because so many parents struggle with their kids getting in a car accident and they can't get information, but they're paying the hospital bills. And about good life and who's on your team, and you're not in here alone. You're not here alone, and I really just think we have to have those conversations at a younger age. So it's not about end of life. It's not about disease. It's just about living life well at all ages. So. Thank you again and again. I encourage our listeners to, go get the book, The Family Guide to Aging Parents. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and I look forward to having you back on the show in the future.
I'm going to go. Take care, Lori. Take care.
Thank you.
Right,
bye-bye now.
Very much.
Bye-bye. I'm going to go ahead and just review some highlights. What a great conversation. I just learned so much. I just found it very, very fascinating. I wanted to also point out to you our show from last week where we talked with the author Jean Lee. She wrote the book, The Alzheimer's Daughter, and it was just a real beautiful story about both her parents that she was dealing with that had dementia. And it was a very private and personal journey that she shares, and just a beautiful, beautiful book that I think people would be interested in reading. Our second guest last week was Richard Morgan, and he's actually the author of 18 different fabulous books. But we talked about At the Edge of Life, Conversations When Death is Near. And again, just a good conversation was had on that radio show. So if you haven't listened to it, I would recommend that you go back to it. Next week, we are going to have the founder of the ABC Approach to Alzheimer's Awareness and Care Through the Arts. And we are also going to have two women who wrote a book called Singing in the Rain. And it's about how two couples, each dealing with dementia, came together to support one another. And it's really quite fascinating. It will be a really fun conversation next week as well. Let's see, what else can I tell you? We've got next week we'll have our dementia chats back up and running. Hopefully the technology problems will cease. I'm still working with Adobe Connect and Logitech to work together on that. All of a sudden equipment isn't talking. And so we had a little bit of difficulty last week, but hopefully that will be fixed. But those shows are free. Those are webinars, and you can get information on the website regarding those. And that is where our experts are living with dementia. And we don't really have an agenda. We kind of go with the flow of where those with dementia, what issues they want to talk about, and then as well as our participants are extremely active in the webinars as well. So again, that will be next Tuesday. And then on the blog, there was a post I did on the 31st about a series that NPR did called Inside Alzheimer's with Greg O'Brien. And Greg is just a fascinating guy, lives out in Cape Cod, was a journalist. And there's a bunch of short little videos that he talks about what it's like to have dementia. And I think people will find those just fascinating. On the 26th, I did a blog post about joining a nation to make a difference, and this has to do with the Dementia Action Alliance survey, and you can find that either on the blog, again, that was dated May 26th, or you can just go to the homepage of alzheimersspeaks.com and click right on there, and you can get to both surveys. Again, this is for U.S. Only, and there is a survey for those living with dementia as well as a survey for care partners. There's also an article that talks about the challenges of more people with Alzheimer's and dementia are having as they become activists. And it was written by the Washington Post reporter Frederick Kunkel. And he just did a great job highlighting several different advocates and their roles and challenges that they faced. In fact, Michael Ellenbogen, who had called in earlier on this show, was one of them. And I think you will find that article extremely, extremely interesting. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this week. I'll give one last shout out to our Purple Angel Project. If you want to be part of the movement and create awareness by having simple conversations just by posting a symbol, a global symbol called the Purple Angel. Again, go to alzheimersspeaks.com to our About page. Click on the Purple Angel tab, and I will get that information out to you. If you are looking for Alzheimer's Association anywhere in the world, go to Alzheimer's Disease International. They will hook you up. Again, if you're interested in a trial for Alzheimer's, go to the Alzheimer's team on Facebook, and there you will be able to link to the Alzheimer's study. And again, it's just about advancing research and possibly enrolling your loved one who is diagnosed in a clinical trial today. Short survey you can take, and again, it costs no money and can help reshape Alzheimer's treatments in the future. Who else do I want to? I'll give a shout out again to the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, HealthStar Home Health, the Lewy Body Dementia Association, as well as the Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration, and the National Aphasia Association. Have a blessed week, and again, thank you all so much for sharing this show with your Google circles, with your Facebook friends, with your LinkedIn colleagues, with your email lists or your newsletters. Feel free to go ahead and link this up. The more information that we can pass along and work together, the better and the faster we're going to be able to shift our dementia care culture. Have a wonderful week. Bye now.
It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here, host of Retire Repurposed. Now this podcast is about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. We believe retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful, purposeful, and fulfilling season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.